My son thought he could discard me via text message like a piece of scrap metal. He thought I was just a senile old man who would quietly fade into the background while he enjoyed the luxury vacation I paid for. He forgot that before I was a retiree, I was a precision engineer. When I read his text on the morning we were supposed to leave telling me I was no longer invited to the cruise I had funded, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply walked into my home office, opened my safe, and initiated a sequence of events that would strip them of everything they took for granted. They wanted a private family vacation without the old man. Well, I decided to give them more privacy than they could ever handle. By the time they return to shore, they won't even have a home to come back to. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their entire lives in less than a week, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you believe that respecting your parents is a non-negotiable rule of life. My name is Thomas Miller. I am 70 years old, and for the last 4 decades, my hands have been stained with grease and metal shavings. I built Miller Precision Mechanics from a single lathe in a garage into a regional powerhouse. I made parts for aerospace companies, for medical devices, for things that require absolute perfection. My wife Martha, God rest her soul, was the heart of the operation, while I was the hands. When she passed away 3 years ago, the silence in our house was louder than any machine in my shop. To fill that silence and to secure the future for my son Brian and his wife Kimberly, I made the hardest decision of my life. Last month I sold the shop. I signed the papers, handed over the keys to a conglomerate, and walked away with a check for $3.8 million after taxes. I haven't told Brian the full amount yet. He knows I sold it, but he thinks I just got enough to retire comfortably. I wanted to surprise them. I wanted to set up trust funds for grandchildren that don't even exist yet. To celebrate this new chapter, I booked us a family cruise to the Mediterranean. It wasn't just any cruise. I booked the royal suite for them and a connecting stateroom for me. I paid for the flight upgrades, the excursions, the premium beverage packages. The total bill came to $24,500. It was a lot of money, but I thought it was an investment in memories. I thought it was a way to reconnect with my son, to show Kimberly that I could be a fun grandfather figure to bond. I was ready. My suitcases were packed by the door. I had polished my best dress shoes. I had even bought a new tuxedo for the captain's dinner. I woke up at 6 in the morning purely out of habit. My internal clock is still set to the shift changes at the factory. I was sitting at the kitchen table nursing a black coffee, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety when my phone buzzed against the wood. It was a text from Brian. I put on my reading glasses, expecting a message about what time they would pick me up. Instead, I read the words that made my blood run cold. Dad, change of plans. We think it is best if you sit this one out. Kimberly really needs us to focus on our marriage right now, and she wants it to be just family. We will send you photos. Love you. Just family. I stared at those 2 words until they blurred. Just family. As if I were a neighbor or a distant acquaintance. As if I hadn't changed his diapers, paid for his college tuition at Harvard, and bought the house they were currently sleeping in. I am his father. I am the definition of his family. I didn't reply by text. I needed to hear his voice. I needed him to say this to me man to man. I dialed his number. It rang 4 times. I expected it to go to voicemail, but then the line clicked open. It wasn't Brian. It was Kimberly. Thomas, she said. Her voice wasn't apologetic. It was sharp, impatient, like she was talking to a telemarketer. Did you not get Brian's text? We are really busy trying to get everything packed. I gripped the phone tighter. Kimberly, I paid $25,000 for this trip. My bags are packed. What is going on? Let me speak to Brian. Brian is busy loading the car, she snapped. And honestly, Thomas, this is exactly why we need this time apart. You are always hovering. Look, let's be real. You are 70. You walk slow. You complain about the food. You need naps. You kill the vibe. This is supposed to be a luxury vacation, not a nursing home excursion. We want to enjoy ourselves without having to worry about whether Grandpa can keep up. My hand was shaking not from age but from a rage I hadn't felt since a supplier tried to sell me substandard steel in '89. I am not an invalid, Kimberly, I said, my voice low and steady. I run 5 miles a week. I just sold my company for millions. I am perfectly capable. She laughed. A cruel, dismissive sound. Oh, stop it. You sold a dusty old shop. Congratulations. Look, Brian agrees with me. He just didn't want to hurt your feelings, so he sent the text. We need space. We need to reconnect as a couple, and having you there asking questions and telling the same boring stories about Martha, it is just not going to work. Stay home. Watch some TV. We will bring you back a souvenir. She hung up. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, suffocating. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I didn't see a decrepit old man. I saw Thomas Miller, the man who could spot a microscopic fracture in a turbine blade with his naked eye. I saw a man who had worked 16-hour days so his son would never have to touch a wrench if he didn't want to. She said I walked slow. She said I killed the vibe. She said Brian agreed with her. My son. The boy I raised to be a man of honor. The boy whose Harvard education I paid for by refinancing my business twice. He let his wife tell me I was unwanted trash on a trip I funded. He hid behind a text message because he was too cowardly to look me in the eye. I looked at the luggage by the door, the new tuxedo still in its plastic wrap. The excitement I had felt 5 minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They didn't want me. They wanted my money. They wanted the lifestyle I provided, but they didn't want the man who earned it. I sat there for a long time listening to the refrigerator hum. I thought about Martha. I thought about how she wore the same winter coat for 10 years so Brian could have the best textbooks. I thought about how she scrimped and saved so we could buy that colonial house in the upscale neighborhood for them paying cash so they wouldn't have a mortgage. They were living in a $1.2 million home that I owned. They were driving cars I leased. They were going on a vacation I paid for. And they had the audacity to tell me I wasn't family. A calm settled over me. It is the same calm I get when I have to troubleshoot a catastrophic machine failure. You don't panic. You assess the damage. You isolate the variables. And then you fix it. I picked up my phone again. I didn't call Brian. I didn't call Kimberly. I opened my banking app. I saw the transaction for the cruise agency. $24,500. Non-refundable. Fine. I scrolled down to see the recent activity on the credit card I gave Kimberly for household expenses. I saw charges from yesterday. $1,000 at a luxury boutique. $500 at a salon. $300 at a wine shop. They were gearing up for a high society parade on the deck of that ship. They were planning to play the part of the wealthy power couple, spending my hard-earned money while leaving me behind like a discarded tool. I closed the app. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows across my lawn. Kimberly was right about one thing. I am old. I do have old-fashioned values. And one of those values is that you get what you pay for. And another is that you never, ever bite the hand that feeds you. They wanted to cut me out. Fine. I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would remove myself from the equation completely, but I would take my foundation with me. I walked over to my suitcases. I didn't unpack them. I simply moved them to the closet. Then I went to my desk and pulled out a fresh notepad. I picked up my favorite drafting pen. Step 1, verify the parameters. Step 2, identify the structural weaknesses. Step 3, execute the demolition. I needed to see them. I needed to look Brian in the face one last time before they left. I needed to give them one final chance to be decent human beings, although my gut told me the time for that had passed long ago. I grabbed my car keys. I wasn't going to the port to wave goodbye. I was going to their house, my house, to hear their lie in person. And while I was there, I was going to retrieve something very important. Kimberly said I ruined the atmosphere. Well, she has no idea. The storm hasn't even started yet. I am Thomas Miller, and I am about to teach my son a lesson that Harvard couldn't. I walked out the door, locked it, and got into my truck. The engine roared to life, a sound of raw power. I shifted into gear. The cruise ship departs at 4 this afternoon. That gives me 8 hours. 8 hours is plenty of time to re-engineer their entire reality. They wanted just family. They are about to find out what it feels like to be an orphan. I pulled my truck into the driveway of the house at 42 Oakwood Lane. But it is not old money. It is my money. It is the result of 40 years of sweating over lathes and negotiating steel contracts. I remember the day I handed the cashier check to the realtor. $1,200,000. I paid it in full because Martha always said interest was the devil's tax. We wanted Brian to start his life debt-free, to have the security we fought tooth and nail to acquire. Now looking at the house, I didn't feel pride. I felt like a landlord inspecting a property that had been overrun by squatters. I turned off the engine and took a deep breath. My heart rate was steady at 60 beats per minute. Panic is for amateurs. Precision requires calm. I walked up the flagstone path, noticing that the hydrangeas Martha had planted were dying of thirst. They couldn't even be bothered to turn on the sprinkler system I installed. I rang the doorbell. It took a full minute before the door opened. Brian stood there. He looked disheveled, his shirt half tucked in, sweat beading on his forehead. When he saw me, he didn't open the door wider. He stepped into the frame, using his body as a shield. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I thought I told you we were busy." I looked at my son. He is 35 years old. But in that moment, he looked like a teenager caught smoking behind the garage. "I wanted to hear it from you, Brian," I said, my tone flat. "You sent a text message to cancel my spot on a $25,000 vacation on the morning of departure. I think I deserve an explanation face to face." Brian ran a hand through his hair. He looked back over his shoulder into the house, then turned back to me. His eyes were shifting, unable to lock onto mine. "Look, Dad, it is complicated." He started reciting the script I knew was coming. "Kimberly and I are going through a really rough patch. Our marriage is on the rocks. We have been fighting for months. We didn't want to worry you with the details. This cruise, it is our last-ditch effort to save us. We need total privacy. We need to focus on each other without any distractions." Distractions. That is what I was. A distraction, so you need to be alone, I repeated, testing the tensile strength of his lie. "Just you, Kimberly, and the children." "Exactly." Brian nodded eagerly, thinking I was buying it. "Just us. We need to heal Dad. You understand, don't you? You and Mom always talked about how important marriage is. I am just trying to honor that." Using Martha's memory to justify his cowardice was a low blow even for him. I almost admired the audacity. But then I heard a laugh from inside the house, a loud braying laugh that definitely did not belong to my son or his wife. It sounded like a hyena choking on a bone. I know that laugh. I didn't ask for permission. I simply stepped forward. Brian tried to hold his ground, but I spent 40 years moving heavy machinery. I moved him aside with a stiff shoulder and walked into the foyer. The air conditioning was blasting. The house smelled of expensive perfume and leather. I walked past the formal dining room, where the table I had handcrafted from walnut was covered in travel brochures and empty coffee cups. I continued into the great room, the room with the vaulted ceilings and the fireplace that cost more than my first car. The scene before me was like a tableau of betrayal. There were suitcases everywhere, not just 3 or 4 for a small family. There were at least 8 large, hard-shell suitcases lined up like soldiers, and standing amidst them drinking mimosas at 10 in the morning were not marriage counselors. It was Susan and Bob, Kimberly's parents. And sitting on my leather recliner with his feet up on the coffee table was Kyle, Kimberly's younger brother, who has never held a job for longer than 6 months. The room went silent as I entered. Susan froze with her glass halfway to her mouth. Bob looked down at his shoes. Kyle just stared at me chewing gum with his mouth open. "So this is what a private attempt to save a marriage looks like," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden quiet. Brian rushed in behind me, stammering, "Dad, wait, I can explain." Kimberly descended the stairs at that moment. She was wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and carrying a designer beach bag. When she saw me, her expression didn't show shame. It showed annoyance. Pure, unadulterated irritation. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Thomas," she snapped, dropping the bag on a chair. "Do you have to make everything a scene?" I ignored her tone. I walked over to the pile of luggage. I looked at the tags. I saw Brian's name. I saw Kimberly's name. And then I saw it. A bright blue tag on a Louis Vuitton suitcase that certainly didn't belong to me. Guest name Susan Henderson. Cabin Royal Suite Connecting. That was my cabin. That was the room I had paid $6,000 for so I could be close to my grandchildren. I turned to Kimberly. "You gave my ticket to your mother." Kimberly walked over to the kitchen island and poured herself a glass of water, acting as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "My parents are here for emotional support." "Thomas," she said, taking a sip, "Brian and I are in crisis. I need my family around me. My mother helps with the kids. My father offers guidance. They are essential for this trip if we are going to make it work." "And Kyle?" I pointed to the brother who was now scrolling on his phone. "Is he here for spiritual guidance? Kyle is going through a hard time," she said dismissively. "He needed a break from what I asked." "From unemployment," Kimberly slammed the glass down. "See, this is exactly why you weren't invited. You are negative. You are critical. You judge everyone. My family brings light and energy. You bring heaviness. You walk around checking the thermostat and inspecting the floorboards like a building inspector. It is exhausting, Thomas. We are going on a luxury cruise to the Mediterranean. We want to drink wine and laugh and relax. We don't want to listen to you talk about gear ratios and interest rates." I looked at Brian. He was standing by the fireplace looking at the floor. He wouldn't even look at me. He was letting his wife eviscerate his father in the house his father bought. "Brian," I said, "I paid $24,500 for this trip. I transferred the funds 3 months ago." Brian mumbled something. "Speak up," I commanded. "We appreciate the gift, Dad," he said, finally looking up with pleading eyes. "We really do, and we will pay you back someday. But right now, Kimberly needs this. She needs her family. Her family." The words hung in the air. I looked at Susan and Bob. They were wearing new clothes, expensive resort wear. I recognized the brand logos. I looked at the pile of luggage. I did a quick mental calculation. The clothes, the luggage, the upgrades they must have purchased to add Kyle to the itinerary. They had easily spent $10,000 in the last week. Money that came from the joint account I funded. So I said slowly, piecing it together. "You are taking the vacation I paid for. You are staying in the suite I booked. And you are bringing the in-laws who haven't contributed a dime to this household, all while telling me I am too old and boring to join." "It is not about the money," Thomas Susan chimed in, her voice shrill. "It is about the family dynamic. You just don't fit the vibe." The vibe. That word again. I looked around the room one last time. I memorized every detail. The wine stain on the rug they hadn't cleaned. The scratches on the hardwood floor from dragging suitcases. The way Kimberly looked at me with utter contempt, like I was the hired help. who had overstayed his welcome. I realized then that there was no saving this. There was no misunderstanding. This was a hostile takeover. They had taken my resources, my generosity, and my love, and they had weaponized it against me. "Fine," I said. I kept my face completely neutral. I adjusted my cuffs. "If that is how it is." I turned to Brian. "Have a safe trip, son. I hope the emotional support is worth it." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out the front door. As I closed it behind me, I heard Kimberly let out a loud sigh. Finally, she said, "I thought he would never leave. God, he is so depressing." I walked back to my truck. The sun was higher now. The heat was rising. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the house one last time. They thought I was leaving to go home and sulk. They thought I was going to sit in my empty house and wait for their postcards. They were wrong. I wasn't going home. I was going to verify a few things. You see, when I was in the kitchen, I noticed something in the trash can by the door. It was just a glimpse, but my eyes are trained to spot anomalies. It was a brochure, and next to it a crumpled piece of paper with my name on it. I needed to see what that was. But I couldn't go back in there now. I had to be smart. I had to be patient. I started the truck and drove down the street, but I didn't go far. I pulled into a cul-de-sac 2 blocks away and waited. I knew their schedule. They had a flight to catch. They would be leaving in 20 minutes. And once they were gone, I was going back in. Not as a father, but as an auditor. Because that plausible lie about a marriage crisis didn't hold up against the data. You don't bring your deadbeat brother on a romantic reconciliation trip. There was something else going on, something deeper, and I was going to find the blueprints before they even reached the airport. I checked my watch. 10:15. The game had officially begun. I watched from the end of the block as the airport shuttle van pulled into my driveway. From my vantage point behind a row of hedges, I saw the performance continue. Kimberly was directing the driver with frantic hand gestures, ordering him to load the bags with care, treating a working man like a servant. Brian was pacing the sidewalk, checking his phone, looking nervous. They looked like a family, running away from a crime scene, which in a moral sense is exactly what they were doing. When the van finally pulled away, turning the corner and disappearing toward the highway, I didn't feel sadness. I felt the cold, hard click of a switch flipping in my brain. It is the same feeling I used to get when I switched a machine from manual to automatic. The emotional component was gone. Now it was just execution. I drove my truck back up the driveway and parked it right where their shuttle had been. The house stood silent, looming over me. It was a beautiful structure, brick and mortar paid for with 40 years of my life. But as I walked up the steps and unlocked the front door with my key, it felt different. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a hostile environment that needed to be secured. I stepped inside. The air was still thick with Kimberly's perfume and the lingering smell of the expensive breakfast they had rushed through. I locked the door behind me and engaged the deadbolt. I wanted to be undisturbed. My destination wasn't the living room or the kitchen. It was the study. Brian called it his home office, a pretentious title for a room where he mostly played video games and pretended to look for business opportunities. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors I had installed myself. I opened the door to the study. It was a disaster. Papers were strewn across the desk, empty energy drink cans lined the windowsill, and a half-eaten bagel sat on top of a stack of invoices. It was the workspace of a chaotic mind, a mind that lacked discipline. In my shop, a messy station meant a dangerous worker. Here it meant a careless one. I walked around the desk. My eyes scanned the room looking for anomalies. I didn't have to look hard. Brian and Kimberly were arrogant. They assumed I was a senile old fool who would never pry, who would never question their narrative. They didn't think to shred their secrets. They just threw them away. The wastebasket under the desk was overflowing. It was a goldmine of information waiting to be excavated. I sat down in Brian's expensive ergonomic chair, a chair I had paid for, and pulled the trash can between my knees. I began to sort through the refuse with the same precision I used to sort scrap metal. Then, near the bottom, crumpled into a tight ball, I found a glossy brochure. I smoothed it out on the desk. The cover featured a generic stock photo of smiling elderly people playing checkers in a sunlit room. The title read, Golden Horizon Charity Care Facility. Charity care. I frowned. Why would my son be looking at a charity facility? I had millions in the bank. I had excellent health insurance. I had just sold my company for a fortune. I flipped the brochure open. It wasn't a luxury retirement community. It was a state-subsidized facility for the indigent. The text boasted about low-cost shared rooms and government assistance programs. I dug deeper into the trash. I found a printed email torn in half. I pieced it together. It was a correspondence between Kimberly and an admissions director at Golden Horizon. The email read, "We understand the patient has significant assets, but we are looking for a facility that can handle aggressive dementia cases without draining the estate. We need to preserve the capital for family needs. Is there a way to qualify for state aid if we restructure his ownership status, aggressive dementia?" My hands went still. I have never had a memory lapse in my life. I can recite the serial numbers of machines I sold 10 years ago. They weren't just planning to put me in a home. They were building a narrative that I was losing my mind. They wanted to warehouse me in a low-budget facility to save my money, so they could spend it on themselves. But the smoking gun was at the very bottom of the bin. It was a draft document, heavy bond paper, with sticky notes attached to the margins in Kimberly's handwriting. Durable power of attorney and guardianship petition. I started reading. The legal jargon was dense, but the intent was crystal clear. The document was a petition to the court to declare Thomas Miller, that is me, mentally incompetent, due to advanced cognitive decline. It requested that Brian Miller be appointed as my legal guardian with full control over all financial assets, real estate, and medical decisions. There was a note in red ink in the margin next to the clause about liquidating assets. It said, "Check with lawyer if we can sell the remaining machine shop shares immediately after the order is signed. Need cash for Kyle's situation." Kyle, Kimberly's deadbeat brother. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a terrifying clarity. The cruise wasn't a vacation. It was a holding pattern. They wanted me out of the way, or perhaps they realized that taking me on the cruise was too risky. If I was around them for 10 days, I might overhear something. I might see the credit card alerts. By leaving me behind, isolated and rejected, they probably hoped I would fall into a depression. Or maybe they planned to come back and claim that my behavior regarding the trip, my anger, my confusion, was proof of my dementia. They were going to gaslight me into a straitjacket. I looked at the date on the draft. It was created 3 days ago. While I was packing my tuxedo, excited to spend time with my grandchildren, my son was drafting the legal paperwork to strip me of my human rights. He was planning to declare me invalid so he could sell off the last remnants of my life's work to pay for his brother-in-law's gambling debts, or whatever trouble Kyle was in. I felt a wave of nausea, but I pushed it down. There is no room for sickness in the middle of a critical operation. I looked up at the wall where a framed photo of Brian graduating from college hung. He looked so proud in that picture. I remembered how hard Martha and I had worked to pay that tuition. I remembered the overtime, the missed holidays, the sacrifices. We did it so he would have a better life. We didn't do it so he could become a monster. I took out my phone and photographed every single document. The brochure, the torn email, the draft petition with the handwritten notes. I made sure the resolution was high, the text legible. Then I carefully folded the physical papers and placed them in my inside jacket pocket. These were not just trash anymore. They were evidence. They were the ammunition I would use to defend my life. I stood up and walked out of the study. The house felt even colder now. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a crime scene where a conspiracy had been hatched. I looked at the furniture, the art on the walls, the expensive electronics. All of it paid for by me. All of it enjoyed by people who viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. I walked into the kitchen. I needed water. My throat was dry as dust. As I filled a glass from the tap, I noticed a calendar on the refrigerator. It was one of those family organizers Kimberly loved to display. Today's date was circled in red Mediterranean cruise. Underneath it, in smaller letters barely legible, was a note. Call Dr. Evans, re-competency, eval upon return. They had a schedule. They had a timeline. They thought they had weeks to execute their plan. They thought the old man was sitting at home crying over a missed boat ride. They had no idea that the old man was currently standing in their kitchen holding the blueprints to their destruction. I finished the water and set the glass down in the sink. I didn't wash it. Let them find it. Let them wonder who was here. I checked my watch. 11 a.m. My lawyer James Morrison would be in his office. James was an old shark, a man I had used for my business contracts for 30 years. He was ruthless, expensive, and loyal only to the person paying the retainer. And right now, that person was me. I needed to secure my assets before they could file that petition. I needed to ensure that even if they managed to fool a judge, they would find the vault empty. But more than that, I needed to know the full extent of the financial damage. If they were desperate enough to put me in a charity home to save money, it meant they were bleeding cash faster than I realized. I walked to the front door. I paused, looking at the alarm keypad. I knew the code. It was my birthday. How ironic. They used my birth date to secure the house I bought them, while plotting to end my life as a free man. I punched in the code to arm the system. I wanted them to know the house was secure. I wanted them to feel safe on that ship, sipping their cocktails, thinking everything was proceeding according to plan. I stepped out into the bright morning sun. The world looked the same as it had an hour ago, but for me, everything had changed. The father who walked into that house was gone. The man who walked out was a precision instrument of justice. I got into my truck and pulled my phone out. I dialed James's number. "James," I said when he answered, "it's Thomas Miller. Clear your schedule. I am coming in, and I am bringing a disaster with me." I didn't wait for his reply. I hung up and put the truck in gear. The engine growled a deep, satisfying sound. Brian wanted privacy. He wanted to save his marriage. Well, I was about to give him a divorce from his inheritance that would be final and non-negotiable. I drove away from the house on Oakwood Lane, not looking back. The demolition had begun. I drove my truck into the city, merging onto the highway with the flow of weekend traffic. To anyone watching, I was just an old man in a Ford F-150, perhaps heading to the lake for a quiet afternoon of fishing. In reality, I was hunting. I parked 3 blocks away from the glass tower that housed Morrison and Partners. I walked the rest of the way, my baseball cap pulled low. James Morrison has been my lawyer for 30 years. He is a man who wears $3,000 suits and smiles like a shark sensing blood in the water. We have a history. He helped me sue a supplier who tried to bankrupt me in the 90s. He helped me structure the sale of my company last month. He knows where every financial skeleton in my closet is buried, mostly because he helped dig the holes. I didn't have an appointment, but when you pay the kind of retainers I do, you don't need one. The receptionist, a sharp woman named Eleanor, who has been with James as long as I have, nodded me straight through to the corner office. Thomas James said, standing up from his mahogany desk. He didn't offer a pleasantry. He saw the look on my face. He saw the folder of crumpled papers I pulled from my jacket pocket. He pointed to the leather chair opposite him. "Sit. Tell me who we are destroying today." I sat down and laid the evidence on the desk. The brochure for the charity home, the torn email about my alleged dementia, the draft petition for guardianship. James put on his reading glasses. He went silent. The only sound in this room was the hum of the air conditioning and the rustle of paper as he turned the pages. I watched his face. James is a man who has seen everything: divorce, embezzlement, corporate espionage. But as he read the notes in Kimberly's handwriting, his jaw tightened. They are moving fast, he said, finally taking off his glasses. This petition is aggressive. They are citing cognitive decline to bypass the usual waiting periods. They want emergency temporary guardianship. If they file this on Monday, while you are supposedly confused about missing the cruise, a judge might grant it ex parte. That means without you even being there to defend yourself. They won't get the chance, I said. I want to liquidate everything, James. I want to trigger the nuclear option on the house. I want to secure the proceeds from the shop sale so deep in a trust that they would need a submarine to find it. James nodded, tapping a gold pen against the desk. We can do that. But first, we need to check the current status of the real estate assets. I recall there was a hanging issue with the deed transfer on the Oakwood Lane property. He turned to his computer and began typing furiously. I frowned. Hanging issue? We bought that house 3 years ago, I said. I paid $1.2 million in cash. I put Brian on the deed so he would feel like a man, like a homeowner. But we agreed I would transfer full title to him once they settled in. Correct, James murmured, his eyes scanning the screen. We prepared the quitclaim deed and the transfer of ownership affidavit 2 years ago. It was supposed to be a gift, a tax-free transfer of equity. He stopped typing. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. Thomas, do you remember why that transfer was delayed? I thought back. I remembered sitting in this very office waiting for Brian and Kimberly. They never showed up. Brian had called breathless, saying Kimberly had a crisis with a dress fitting for a gala or some nonsense. They rescheduled. Then they rescheduled again. And then life happened. Martha got sick. I got busy with the shop. We just forgot. They never signed it, did they? I asked, feeling a surge of adrenaline. James turned the monitor toward me. Not only did they never sign it, he said, pointing to the digital record, but because the initial purchase was structured to protect your investment until the transfer was finalized, you are not just a name on the deed. You are the majority equity holder. I leaned in, squinting at the legal text. The deed lists Thomas Miller and Brian Miller as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. But there is an addendum here, Clause 14b, which specifies that until the quitclaim is executed, the primary investor, that is, you, retains 51% controlling interest in the property. 51%. I sat back, letting the number sink in. I didn't just own a room in that house. I owned the house. Brian was, for all legal purposes, a minority shareholder living in my corporate headquarters. That means I can force a sale, I said. James chuckled darkly. Thomas, with 51%, you can paint the house pink and turn it into a petting zoo if you want. But yes, you can force a sale. You can petition for a partition action. Since the property cannot be physically divided, the court will order it sold, and the proceeds split according to equity. And since you paid the initial $1.2 million, we can argue for reimbursement of the capital contribution before any split of the appreciation. That is the lever, I said. That is how I get them out. But there is more. James said, his voice dropping an octave. While I was pulling the property records, I ran a standard liability check on Brian. I wanted to see if there were any liens against the house that might complicate the sale. He handed me a fresh sheet of paper. It was a credit report, but not a normal one. It was a business credit profile linked to an LLC I didn't recognize. Miller Future Ventures. What is this? I asked. Your son has been busy, James said grimly. He registered this LLC 6 months ago. He used your old machine shop's address as the registered headquarters. He used your last name and the reputation of your business to secure lines of credit. I scanned the numbers. My stomach churned. Business loan high-risk lender of $500,000. Venture capital bridge loan $750,000. Private equity promissory note $800,000. Total liabilities $2,050,000. He borrowed $2 million, I whispered. On what collateral? He doesn't have $2 million. He used the implied collateral of his inheritance, James explained. And he likely showed these lenders the draft paperwork of the house transfer, claiming he owned the asset, free and clear. He has been leveraging assets he doesn't fully own to fund. What I remembered the conversation in the trash. The gambling debts. The brother-in-law Kyle. It is not a business, I said, my voice hardening. It is a hole. He is digging a hole to bury his wife's family problems, and he is using my shovel to do it. That explains the rush to put you in a home, James said. If he becomes your guardian, he gets control of your $3.8 million from the shop sale. He uses that to pay off these high-interest loans before the sharks come collecting. He was going to liquidate your life to save his own skin. The picture was complete. It wasn't just greed. It was desperation. Brian wasn't just a bad son. He was a drowning man trying to use his father as a flotation device. The silence in the office was absolute. I looked at the papers. $2 million in debt. A plot to imprison me. A wife who viewed me as luggage. I looked up at James. Draft the partition action, I said. I want the house listed for sale on Monday morning. I want a notice of eviction prepared. And James, yes, Thomas. Contact these lenders. Inform them that Miller Future Ventures has no affiliation with Miller Precision Mechanics. Inform them that the registered address is fraudulent. And tell them that the primary asset Brian claimed to own the house on Oakwood Lane is actually majority owned by a hostile party who has no intention of covering his debts. James smiled. That will trigger immediate default clauses. They will call in the loans instantly. He will be insolvent within 48 hours. Good, I said, standing up. He wanted a private vacation. He wanted to be the man of the house. I am going to give him exactly what he wants. I am going to give him the full, unadulterated experience of being a man who has to stand on his own 2 feet without his daddy's wallet to prop him up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there near the airport, my son was probably boarding a plane, sipping a drink, thinking he had pulled off the perfect crime. He thought he had weeks to maneuver. He thought the old engineer was at home watching game shows and napping. He forgot that I built my fortune on precision and timing. I checked my watch. 1 p.m. They would be taking off soon. I turned back to James. One more thing. Do you still have that contact at the security firm? The one who specializes in surveillance, James raised an eyebrow. I do. Why? Because I found out about this cruise on the day of departure, I said. I missed the boat. But Kimberly, she bought a new wardrobe for this trip. Expensive dresses. And I know for a fact she hasn't packed them all yet. Some of them are probably still hanging in her closet, waiting for the final packing round before they left. Or maybe she packed them, but left the tags and receipts. I paused, formulating the next phase of the plan. I need a bug, James. A listening device. Small. Button size. You want to bug them? James asked, looking skeptical. Thomas, that is legally gray. I am the majority owner of the house, I reminded him. I have the right to secure my property, and I am not going to put it in the wall. I am going to put it in something that is traveling with them. James stared at me for a moment, then let out a short, sharp laugh. You are going to plant it in her luggage. I am going to plant it on her person, I corrected. I saw a dress in the hallway, a hideous sequined thing she plans to wear for the captain's dinner. It has a thick hem. Get me the device, James. I have a fishing trip to finish. James opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small black box. He tossed it to me. Battery life is 10 days, he said. Voice activated. Uploads to a cloud server you can access from your phone. Don't get caught. I caught the box. It felt light, insignificant. But it was the key to the final lock. I won't get caught, I said. I am just a slow old man, remember, who pays attention to the elderly. I walked out of the office, the device in my pocket, the evidence of my son's financial ruin in my mind. The fishing trip was over. It was time to bait the hook. I walked out of James Morrison's office with a device smaller than a dime burning a hole in my pocket. It was a matte black disc, smooth and cold, weighing less than 3 grams. To the untrained eye, it looked like a spare button or a piece of plastic debris. To me, it was the most important piece of machinery I had ever handled. It was a listening device with a 10-day battery life voice activation and a direct uplink to a secure cloud server I could access from my smartphone. The drive back to Oakwood Lane was a blur of calculation. I wasn't thinking about the traffic or the heat. I was thinking about seams fabric density and audio clarity. I spent 40 years engineering parts that had to perform under extreme pressure. Installing a bug into a dress was not espionage to me. It was a retrofit. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was still silent. The alarm system was still armed just as I had left it. I deactivated it and stepped inside. The air was still cool, preserved by the expensive HVAC system I paid to maintain. I walked straight to the master bedroom, the room Brian and Kimberly had claimed as their sanctuary. The closet door was open. Inside it looked like a bomb had gone off in a textile factory. Clothes were pulled off hangers, shoeboxes were overturned, and rejected outfits were piled on the floor. It was the aftermath of a panic packing session. My eyes scanned the chaos until they landed on the target. Hanging on the back of the bathroom door, forgotten in their haste, was the dress. It was a garment that cost $3,200. I knew the price because I had seen the charge on the American Express bill last month. It was an emerald green evening gown, heavy with sequins and beading, designed for the captain's dinner. Kimberly had raved about it for weeks, claiming it was essential for her image. And then in her typical fashion, she had left it behind. This was not luck. This was probability. Careless people make careless mistakes. I took the dress down. It was heavy, the fabric thick and lined with silk. Perfect. I carried it to the kitchen island where the lighting was best. I retrieved a sewing kit from the utility drawer. Martha had taught me how to sew buttons when we were first married because we couldn't afford a tailor. My hands, though aged, were steady. When I was done, I smoothed the fabric. Invisible. I checked the app on my phone. Device active. Signal strength 100%. I tapped the dress gently. The bars on the audio visualizer jumped. It was working. Now came the delivery. I picked up my phone and dialed Brian. He answered on the second ring, his voice tense. Dad. Why are you calling? We are at the hotel waiting for the shuttle to the port. You forgot something, I said, keeping my voice helpful, almost subservient. Kimberly's green dress. The one with the sequins. It is hanging on the bathroom door. There was a muffled curse on the other end. I heard Kimberly's voice in the background, shrill and panicked. My dress. Oh my God. Brian, tell me you packed it, she left it. Brian said to me, sounding exhausted. Dad, we can't come back. We are 40 minutes away, and traffic is a nightmare. I will bring it to you, I offered. I am already in the truck. I can be there in 30 minutes. Consider it a bon voyage gesture. There was a pause. I knew what they were thinking. They didn't want to see me. They didn't want the old man ruining their vibe before they even set sail. But Kimberly's vanity was a powerful force. She wanted that dress more than she wanted to avoid me. fine, Brian sighed. We are at the Marriott Harbor Beach. Meet us in the lobby. And Dad? Just drop it off, okay? We have a lot of coordination to do with Kimberly's parents. Understood, I said. Just a drop-off. I hung up. I folded the dress carefully and placed it in a garment bag. I walked out to the truck, the Trojan horse in my hand. The drive to the hotel was smooth. I parked in the valet circle, ignoring the attendant who looked at my truck with disdain. I walked into the lobby, the garment bag over my shoulder. I saw them immediately. They were sitting in a corner lounge. Susan and Bob were ordering drinks. Kyle was asleep on a sofa. Brian and Kimberly were arguing in hushed tones. I walked over. Kimberly looked up, her eyes landing on the garment bag like a predator spotting prey. You found it, she said, not saying thank you, but reaching out her hand. I handed it to her. Safe and sound, I said. I wouldn't want you to miss your big night. Thanks, Dad, Brian said, not looking me in the eye. Look, we really have to go meet the coordinator. I know, I said. I just wanted to help. Have a wonderful trip. I turned and walked away. I didn't linger. I didn't beg for a hug. I walked straight back to my truck, got in, and drove to a parking lot across the street. I turned off the engine and put on my noise-canceling headphones. I opened the app. The audio feed was crystal clear. At first there was just the sound of rustling fabric as Kimberly unzipped the bag to check the dress. It's fine, I heard her say. The old fool didn't wrinkle it. Then the sound of movement. Walking. An elevator ding. They were moving to a more private area, likely their hotel room, before heading to the ship. The door clicked shut. The background noise of the lobby vanished, replaced by the hum of a quiet room. I poured myself a coffee from my thermos and listened. So is everything set? With the lawyer Kimberly's voice cut through the silence. It was sharp, devoid of the fake sweetness she used in front of neighbors. Brian's voice replied lower, more hesitant. Yes. He is drafting the petition now. We file it on Monday morning. By the time we get back from the cruise, the emergency order should be signed. Good, Kimberly said. I don't want to spend another month pretending to be nice to him. It is exhausting. Did you tell the facility about his dietary restrictions? Who cares about his diet? Brian laughed. It was a cold, unfamiliar sound. It is a state facility, Kim. They feed them whatever slop is cheapest. He will eat what he is given. My hand tightened around the coffee cup. State facility. Slop. But are you sure we can sell the shop shares immediately? Kimberly asked. Kyle's bookie is calling me every day. He needs that $50,000 by the first of the month, or he is going to start breaking legs. Don't worry, Brian assured her. Once I have power of attorney, I can liquidate whatever I want. I will claim it is for his medical care. We will sell the remaining 49% of the shop equity. That should net us at least $200,000. We pay off Kyle's debt, put the rest in the offshore account, and dump the old man in the golden horizon. Kyle's debt. Gambling. My son was planning to sell the last pieces of my legacy, the company I built with my own sweat, to pay off a thug who was threatening his deadbeat brother-in-law. But what about the house? Kimberly asked. Can we sell that too eventually? Brian said. But let's keep it for now. We can rent out his room once he is gone. Maybe turn it into an Airbnb. More income stream. They were carving up my life like a Thanksgiving turkey. I just want this over with, Kimberly sighed. I want him gone. He is just a weight, Brian. A heavy, useless weight. He is, Brian agreed. He is an old ATM that is starting to malfunction. We just need to make one last withdrawal and then unplug the machine. Unplug the machine. I sat in my truck, the Florida sun beating down on the windshield, and felt a chill that went straight to my marrow. My son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy I held when he cried over a broken toy. The man I had entrusted with my future. He didn't see a father. He saw a malfunctioning appliance, a broken ATM. I took off the headphones. I didn't need to hear anymore. The evidence was recorded. It was saved in the cloud, duplicated on 3 different servers. It was admissible. It was damning. I looked at the hotel across the street. I could see the window of what I assumed was their suite. They were in there high-fiving, drinking my champagne, planning my demise. They thought they had won. They thought the game was over. They didn't realize that the ATM had just installed a self-destruct sequence. I picked up my phone. I didn't call the police yet. That was too easy. Too quick. I wanted them to get on that boat. I wanted them to be in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by luxury they couldn't afford when the hammer dropped. I opened my contact list and found James Morrison's number again. "James," I said when he answered. "Proceed with the forced sale." And James was. "Yes, Thomas, trigger. The credit freeze. Immediately. I want every card, every account, every line of credit linked to my name or the house to be frozen." But Thomas James warned, "If you do that now while they are checking in—" "Do it," I commanded. "And James, prepare the eviction notice. I want it taped to the front door before the sun goes down." I hung up. I started the truck. I had one more stop to make before I went home. I needed to move the rest of my things, my photos of Martha, my medals from the Engineering Association, the things that actually mattered. If you were me sitting in that truck listening to your own flesh and blood call you a piece of machinery to be discarded, what would you do? Would you turn the other cheek? Would you try to reason with them? Or would you do exactly what I am about to do and burn their parasitic paradise to the ground? Leave a comment below and tell me if I am a monster or if I am just a man who finally decided to stop being a victim. I pulled out of the parking lot. The demolition wasn't just coming. It was here. And the first wrecking ball was about to hit them right in the wallet. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, the room that was supposed to be my home but had felt more like a holding cell for the past 3 years. The house was quiet now. The frenzy of packing was over. The shuttle had departed. The hotel meeting was finished. My son and his wife were currently en route to the port, probably clinking glasses of champagne in the back of a luxury transport, toasting to their freedom and their cleverness. I held a silver-framed photograph in my hands. It was the only thing I had taken off the nightstand. It was a picture of Martha and me taken 20 years ago. We were standing in front of the machine shop, covered in grime, looking exhausted but triumphant. We had just fulfilled a massive contract for a defense contractor. It was the job that finally put us in the black. I ran my thumb over Martha's face. She looked so tired in that picture. The dark circles under her eyes were not from age, but from overwork. She handled the books, the payroll, the cleaning, and the shipping. She worked 18-hour days right alongside me. And she did it all for one reason. Brian. I remembered the night the acceptance letter from Harvard arrived. It was on the kitchen table, a thick cream-colored envelope. Brian was jumping around the living room, shouting with joy. He was so happy. He had worked hard in school, I will give him that. But when he went to bed that night, dreaming of the Ivy League, Martha and I sat at that same table with a calculator and a checkbook. The tuition room and board were $52,000 a year. That was 20 years ago. Adjusted for inflation, it was a fortune. We didn't have that kind of liquidity. The shop was growing, but every dime was reinvested in machinery. I remember looking at Martha. I remember the fear in her eyes. "We can't afford it, Thomas," she had whispered. "We would have to mortgage the house. We would have to sell the second line of lathes. We will make it work," I had told her. He is going. He is going to be the first miller to wear a suit to work instead of overalls. And we did make it work. Martha stopped buying new clothes. We canceled our 10th anniversary trip. She worked herself into the ground for him. She sacrificed her comfort, her health, and eventually her life to build the foundation he stood on. And what did he say about us today? A clueless old man, a malfunctioning ATM, A useless weight to be discarded in a state facility where they feed you slop. I looked at the photo again. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, white-hot rage. It was a tear of mourning for the wife who had given everything to a boy who grew up to be a monster. He wasn't my son anymore. The realization hit me with the force of a hydraulic press. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a biological fact in my mind. The boy I raised, the boy Martha loved, was dead. He had been replaced by this parasite, this creature who viewed his parents not as human beings, but as resource nodes to be harvested until dry. A son protects his father. A son honors his mother's sacrifice. A predator isolates the weak and strips the carcass. Brian was a predator, and Kimberly was the scavenger picking at the bones. I set the photo down on the bed. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the lawn I paid to have mowed. I looked at the luxury SUV in the driveway that I helped finance. They had mistaken my love for weakness. They had mistaken my generosity for stupidity. They thought that because I gave freely, I had no concept of value. They were about to learn the cost of everything. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hand was steady. My heart was cold. I dialed James Morrison. He answered on the first ring. He knew I wasn't calling to chat. "James," I said. "I am at the house. I am looking at the assets." "Go on," Thomas James replied. "I want you to execute the forced sale option, the partition action. File it first thing Monday morning. I want the for sale sign on this lawn before they even dock at their first port of call." "Consider it done," James said. "We will cite irreconcilable differences between co-owners. We will demand liquidation of the asset to recover your initial capital contribution of $1.2 million plus appreciation." "But that is not all," I continued. I was walking around the room now, pacing like a tiger in a cage. "I want you to go through the last 10 years of financial records. Every check I wrote to Brian. Every transfer to Kimberly." "Okay," James said, the sound of his keyboard clicking in the background. "What are we looking for?" "I want to reclassify every single transaction," I said. "The $60,000 for the BMW down payment. The $40,000 for their wedding venue overrun. The $15,000 for the nursery renovation. The $10,000 for their anniversary trip to Paris last year." "Reclassify them as what James asked." "Gifts." "No," I snarled. "Loans. Informal demand loans." "Thomas, that is tricky," James warned. "Unless there is paperwork." "There is paperwork," I lied. "Or at least there is intent. In the memo line of the check for the car, I wrote, 'to help with the car.' Help implies assistance, not a gift. Assistance implies an expectation of responsibility. And since they have proven irresponsible, I am calling in the debt." James paused. He was a shark, but even sharks have to calculate the odds. "We can try," he said slowly. "We can send a demand letter for repayment of informal loans. We can argue that these were advances on an inheritance that has now been revoked. At the very least, it will tie up their credit and freeze their assets during litigation. It will make them insolvent." "That is exactly what I want," I said. "I want them to bleed. I want them to look at their bank accounts and see zero. I want them to try to buy a cocktail on that ship and have the card declined. I want them to feel the panic Martha felt when we were scraping pennies together for his tuition. I want them to know what it feels like to be helpless." "Understood," James said. "I will draft the letters. Total estimated recovery, including the house equity, the informal loans, and the unauthorized use of the business credit cards, I calculated quickly. About $2.5 million. I am going to take it all back, James. Every cent. And the money from the shop sale. The $3.8 million, yes, move it. Today. Get it out of any account Brian has ever seen or heard of. Put it in a blind trust. Beneficiary to be determined later. But make sure the trustee is someone who would sooner burn the money than give it to my son. I will set it up, James promised. Thomas, are you okay? You sound different. I am not Thomas Miller, the father, anymore. James, I said, picking up the photo of Martha again. I am Thomas Miller, the engineer, and I am decommissioning a faulty unit. I hung up the phone. I packed the photo of Martha into my bag. I packed my medals. I packed the few clothes I had left here. I stripped the bed sheets. I left the room bare, sterile, empty. I walked through the house one last time. I didn't feel nostalgia. I felt disgusting. This place was a monument to my blindness. I had built a palace for people who wanted to put me in a dungeon. I stopped in the hallway. There was a portrait of the family hanging there. Me, Martha, Brian, and Kimberly on their wedding day. We all looked so happy. I took the painting off the wall. I looked at Brian's smiling face. I walked to the trash can in the kitchen, the same one where I had found the evidence of their betrayal. I didn't throw the painting away. That would be too emotional. Instead, I took a marker from the drawer. I wrote on the glass over Brian's face. Eviction notice pending. I leaned the painting against the counter, where they would be sure to see it, the moment they walked in, assuming they could even get back inside once I changed the locks. I grabbed my bag and walked to the front door. I punched in the alarm code. I set it to away. I stepped out onto the porch. The sun was setting now. The neighborhood was quiet. It was the American dream, silent and peaceful. But inside 42 Oakwood Lane, a bomb had been armed, and the countdown had started. I got into my truck. I didn't look back. I drove toward the storage unit I had rented an hour ago. I was going to erase my presence from their lives completely, just as they asked. But when I vanished, I was taking the foundation with me. The drive to the port would take them another 20 minutes. They were probably checking their luggage right now. Kimberly was probably complaining about the line. Brian was probably checking his sports bets. Enjoy it, I whispered to the empty cab of my truck. Enjoy the champagne. Because it is the last drink you will ever have on my dime. I turned onto the main road. The grief was gone. The anger was cold and hard like steel. I was ready for the next phase. I was going to the port, not to wave goodbye, but to deliver one final parting gift that would ensure their vacation was a nightmare from the very first second. I checked my pocket. I had the envelope ready. It looked like a generous cash gift. It felt thick. It felt like love. But inside it was a trap. I accelerated. The precision engineer was back at work, and the tolerances were zero. I pulled my truck into the short-term parking lot at the cruise terminal. The port was a chaotic hive of activity. Thousands of people were swarming toward the massive white ship that loomed over the horizon like a floating city. It was the Sea Sovereign, a vessel designed for excess filled with casinos, five-star restaurants, and shops that sold watches costing more than my first house. It was the perfect trap. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I practiced my smile. It had to be the smile of a doting, slightly confused, but ultimately generous grandfather. It had to be the smile of a man who had accepted his place in the background. I adjusted my collar. I wasn't wearing my usual work shirt. I had put on a soft polo and a beige cardigan, the uniform of the harmless retiree. I got out of the truck and walked toward the terminal entrance. The heat radiating off the asphalt was intense, but I barely felt it. My blood was running cold. I scanned the crowd looking for the circus act that was my family. It didn't take long. They were near the VIP check-in line naturally. There was Susan Kimberly's mother wearing a hat that looked like a satellite dish barking orders at a porter. There was Bob looking red-faced and already halfway drunk. There was Kyle looking bored, tapping on his phone. And there were Brian and Kimberly looking stressed, checking their documents. I took a deep breath. Showtime. I approached them slowly, affecting a slight shuffle in my step. I didn't want to look dynamic. I wanted to look like the clueless old man they had laughed about in the office. "Brian Kimberly." I called out, waving my hand. They turned. The look of sheer panic on Brian's face was almost worth the price of admission. Kimberly's eyes narrowed into slits. She whispered something to Brian, probably asking why the security guard hadn't stopped me. "Dad," Brian said, stepping out of the line. "What are you doing here? We already said our goodbyes." You aren't trying to come, are you?" I stopped a few feet away, keeping my hands open and non-threatening. No, I said, forcing a chuckle. "I know, son. Just family. I respect that. I really do. I wanted to see you off. I wanted to see the ship. It is magnificent, isn't it?" Brian relaxed slightly, his shoulders dropping an inch. "Yeah, Dad. It is huge. Look, we are really in a rush. The boarding group is being called." I know, I said. "I won't keep you. I just wanted to give you this." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope made of heavy cardstock. It felt substantial. It felt expensive. Inside, I had placed a small, weighted gift box wrapped in gold foil. Kimberly's eyes locked onto the envelope. Her greed was a reflex as automatic as breathing. She stepped forward, pushing past Brian. "What is this, Thomas?" she asked, her voice skeptical but curious. "It is a bon voyage gift," I said, handing it to her. "I know I have been difficult lately. I know I am set in my ways. And I know this trip is expensive. I didn't want you to worry about money while you are trying to save your marriage. I want you to have the best wine, the best excursions, whatever you need." Kimberly took the envelope. She weighed it in her hand. The heft of the box inside clearly suggested jewelry, or perhaps a stack of cash. Her expression softened instantly. The scowl replaced by that fake saccharine smile I had come to loathe. "Oh, Thomas," she said, clutching the envelope to her chest. That is really sweet of you. You didn't have to." I insisted, I said, patting Brian on the arm. "You are my children. I worked hard my whole life so you could enjoy yours. Go, have a wonderful time. Don't worry about a thing back home. I will water the plants." Brian looked at me. For a second, just a split second, I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. He knew he was screwing me. He knew he was leaving me behind while planning to steal my remaining assets. But the guilt was fleeting, washed away by the relief that I wasn't making a scene. "Thanks, Dad," he said. "You are the best. We will call you when we dock in Barcelona." "Don't worry about calling," I said. "Just enjoy the privacy." I watched them turn around. Kimberly was already tearing at the corner of the envelope as they walked toward the security checkpoint. Susan and Bob followed, dragging their luggage, oblivious to the fact that their free ride was about to end abruptly. I stood there for a long time. I watched them go through the metal detectors. I watched them hand their passports to the agent. I watched them walk up the gangway and disappear into the belly of the beast. Once they were gone, the smile vanished from my face. I walked over to the observation deck that overlooked the harbor. I leaned against the railing, staring at the massive ship. Inside that gold foil box in the envelope was not a diamond necklace. It was a credit card. Specifically, my Platinum American Express supplementary card issued in Kimberly's name. It was the card she had used for years to buy her designer bags and spa treatments. It was the symbol of her status, her magic wand, that made everything she wanted appear. She would open the box and think I was being incredibly generous. She would think I was giving her carte blanche. She would see the card and assume I had paid off the balance and raised the limit for the trip. What she didn't know was that 20 minutes ago, while sitting in my truck, I had logged into the banking portal. I hadn't canceled the card. Canceling it would show up as invalid immediately. No, I had done something much crueler. I had used the parental control features designed for teenagers. I had set a hard spending limit on her supplementary card. The limit was exactly $0.00. But here is the beauty of the system. On her app, if she checked it right now, it would still show the card as active. It wouldn't show the decline until she actually tried to swipe it. It was a landmine waiting for a footstep. I imagined the scene. Tonight. The first dinner. They would go to the specialty steakhouse, the one that charges $100 a head cover charge plus wine. She would order the vintage champagne to celebrate getting rid of the old man. She would hand the waiter that shiny platinum card with a flourish, feeling like a queen. And then the waiter would come back. He would lean in discreetly. He would whisper the word that no social climber ever wants to hear. Declined. She would argue. She would tell him to run it again. She would call the bank, but there would be no cell service in the middle of the ocean, and the ship's Wi-Fi costs money she couldn't pay. They would have to use Brian's cards. But Brian's cards were linked to the business accounts I had frozen this morning with James. Or they were linked to his personal accounts, which were currently overdrawn because he had spent every liquid dime on the down payments for those predatory loans. They were about to be trapped on a floating city of luxury with empty pockets. The ship's horn blasted a deep, mournful sound that vibrated in my chest. The lines were cast off. The water began to churn at the stern. Slowly, majestically, the Sea Sovereign began to pull away from the dock. I watched it go. I saw the passengers lining the decks, waving to the people on shore. I wondered if Brian and Kimberly were up there, waving at the empty space where they thought I should be. "Goodbye," I whispered. I wasn't just saying goodbye to them. I was saying goodbye to the man I used to be. The man who apologized for taking up space. The man who bought affection. That man was on that ship, sailing away to get lost at sea. The man remaining on the dock was Thomas Miller, the engineer. And I had work to do. I checked my watch. 2:30 p.m. The movers were scheduled to arrive at the house at 3. I had hired a professional team, White Glove Logistics. I told them I was downsizing and needed the house cleared of specific items immediately. I turned away from the ocean. I walked back to my truck. The heat was stifling now, but I felt energized. I felt lighter than I had in years. I drove out of the port, merging back into the city traffic. The timeline was tight. I had 48 hours before they reached their first port of call. 48 hours to erase 40 years of history from that house. 48 hours to liquidate the asset they thought was their birthright. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the security system at the house. System disarmed. Master code used. I frowned. Who was at the house? I had the only key, and Brian and Kimberly were on the ship. Then I remembered. Kyle. The deadbeat brother. He must not have boarded with them. Or maybe he gave his key to someone else. Or maybe Brian had given a code to a friend to water the plants. No, they didn't care about the plants. I checked the camera feed on my phone. It wasn't a friend. It was a man in a cheap suit holding a clipboard. He was standing in the foyer looking confused. It was a process server. I laughed out loud. The lenders James had contacted were faster than I thought. They were already trying to serve papers for the default on the business loans. They must have tracked the address to the house. "Good luck," I said to the screen. "You won't find anyone home. And by the time the owners get back, there won't even be a home to find." I accelerated. The demolition was proceeding ahead of schedule. I needed to get to the house before the movers so I could supervise. I wanted to make sure they took everything. The dining table I built. The rug Martha loved. The grandfather clock. I was going to leave them nothing but the echo of their own greed. As I drove, I thought about the envelope in Kimberly's purse. It was a ticking time bomb. Every mile the ship traveled away from the coast was another mile deeper into the trap. "Have a nice trip, family," I said to the empty road. "I hope the buffet is free because that is the only thing you are going to be eating for the next 10 days. I turned onto Oakwood Lane. The for sale sign wasn't up yet, but James had promised it would be there by Monday morning. For now, the house looked peaceful, deceptively peaceful. I pulled into the driveway. The final phase of the operation was about to begin. I was going to gut the house, sell the shell, and disappear into the sunset with my dignity and my fortune intact. And when they returned expecting to put me in a home, they would find that I was the one who had sent them to the poorhouse. I got out of the truck and walked up the steps. I didn't feel like an old man anymore. I felt dangerous, and I liked it. The white glove logistics truck was a massive, pristine white beast idling at the curb when I pulled into the driveway. It looked more like a mobile laboratory than a moving van, which was exactly what I paid for. I didn't hire college kids looking for beer money. I hired professionals who specialize in high-value asset extraction. They don't ask questions. They just execute orders with surgical precision. I got out of my truck and met the foreman, a man named Davis who had a clipboard and the demeanor of a drill sergeant. "Mr. Miller," Davis said, checking his watch. "We are ready to commence, you." "You said this was a partial extraction, correct?" I said, walking up the driveway. "I want you to remove everything that belongs to Thomas and Martha Miller. If it looks like an antique, take it. If it looks like it has sentimental value, take it. If it looks like cheap modern furniture bought on credit, leave it. I want every trace of my wife and my history scrubbed from this structure." Davis nodded. "Understood. We will have the ground floor cleared in 2 hours." I unlocked the front door and disarmed the alarm for the last time. The team moved in like a SWAT unit. They wore boot covers and white gloves. They didn't drag furniture. They lifted it. They didn't toss boxes. They stacked them. I stood in the center of the living room and directed the operation. "That grandfather clock," I said, pointing to the 7-foot-tall mahogany timepiece in the corner. "I built the casing for that in 1982. Rapid in triple padding. 2 men lifted the heavy clock as if it were made of balsa wood. As they carried it out, the rhythmic ticking that had been the heartbeat of this house for 3 years suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was clean. "Take the Persian rug," I ordered. "Martha bought that on our honeymoon. It is too good for the muddy shoes of people who don't respect property." They rolled up the rug, revealing the hardwood floor underneath. There were scratches near the sofa where Kyle had been resting his feet. Scars on the floor I paid for. I went to the kitchen. I packed Martha's collection of hand-painted ceramic bowls myself. Each one was a memory. A trip to Santa Fe. A weekend in Vermont. Brian and Kimberly used them for popcorn and dog food. I wrapped each one in bubble wrap, sealing the memories away where they couldn't be tarnished. Within 3 hours, the house had been lobotomized. The warmth was gone. The character was gone. All that was left were the trendy, soulless pieces Brian and Kimberly had bought to impress their friends. The oversized leather sectional. The abstract art that looked like spilled paint. The massive television. Without my antiques to anchor the space, their furniture looked cheap and out of place like props on a bad movie set. I did a final walkthrough. The guest room was bare. The study was stripped of my books and my drafting table. The garage was empty of my tools. I was ghosting them. But unlike a ghost, I was taking the walls with me. At 4 p.m., a black sedan pulled into the driveway behind the moving truck. It was James Morrison, and he wasn't alone. A tall, severe-looking man in a charcoal suit stepped out of the passenger side. This was Marcus Sterling, the acquisitions director for Apex Commercial Development. James had called him an hour after I left his office. Apex had been trying to buy this block for 5 years. They wanted to tear down these old colonials and put up a mixed-use office complex. Brian had always refused their offers, claiming he wanted to preserve the neighborhood's integrity, which was rich, coming from a man who had no integrity of his own. Thomas James said as we shook hands on the porch, "This is Mr. Sterling. He has the paperwork ready," Mr. Miller, Sterling said. His grip was firm, his eyes assessing the property not as a home but as square footage. I understand you are motivated to liquidate your position immediately. I am, I said. I own 51% of this property. I have the controlling interest. I want to sell my share to you effective immediately. Sterling nodded, looking at the house. We have reviewed the title with Mr. Morrison. Your position is solid. If we acquire your 51%, we become tenants in common with your son. Since we have no interest in cohabitating with him, we will immediately file for a forced sale of the entire property to liquidate the asset. Or we will charge him market rate rent for his 49% usage until he buys us out, which your lawyer indicates he cannot do. He definitely cannot. I said, thinking of the $2 million in debt Brian was drowning in. Excellent, Sterling said. He didn't smile. This was just business. A line item on a spreadsheet. We are prepared to offer you $850,000 for your interest. It is slightly below market value, but it is a cash offer wire transfer today, closing in 72 hours. $850,000. It was $300,000 less than my share was theoretically worth on paper. But paper value means nothing if you have to spend 2 years in court fighting a guardianship petition. This was cash. This was a war chest. This was a weapon. Done, I said, without hesitation. We didn't even go inside. We used the hood of Sterling's sedan as a desk. I signed the quitclaim deed, transferring my interest to Apex Commercial Development. I signed the assignment of rights. I signed the affidavit confirming that I was of sound mind and acting of my own free will. James notarized every signature on the spot with his portable kit. With the final stroke of the pen, I ceased to be the owner of the home my son lived in. I was now a stranger, and Brian was no longer living in his father's house. He was living in a corporate asset owned by a developer known for its aggressive eviction tactics. The transfer is initiated, Sterling said, tapping on his tablet. You should see the funds in your account within the hour. What about possession, I asked. We take formal possession in 3 days, Sterling said. Tuesday morning. We will send a team to secure the property and assess it for demolition. We will post the notice of new ownership on the door today. Perfect, I said. Sterling got back in his car. James lingered for a moment. Thomas James said quietly, You know what this means, right? When they come back, they will find out that they are trespassers. I finished. They wanted me out of the house. I am out. I just sold my way out. James shook his head, a mixture of awe and fear in his eyes. Remind me never to cross you, Thomas. I patted him on the shoulder. You are paid to be on my side, James. Keep it that way. James drove off. The moving truck was already gone, headed for the climate-controlled storage facility I had rented under a Shell LLC. I was alone on the driveway. My phone buzzed. I checked the notification. Bank alert, incoming wire transfer. $850,000. Available balance $4,650,000. I stared at the number. It was enough money to buy a house on the beach. It was enough money to travel the world for the rest of my life. It was enough money to ensure that I never ever had to rely on anyone again. I walked up to the front door for the final time. I had the key in my hand, but I didn't use it. Instead, I took the thick envelope Sterling had left for me. Inside was a heavy-gauge waterproof sticker. Property of Apex Commercial Development. No trespassing. For inquiries, contact Asset Management. I peeled the backing off the sticker. I placed it right in the center of the heavy oak door covering the brass knocker I had polished just last week. I pressed it down firmly, smoothing out the air bubbles. It looked ugly. It looked industrial. It looked final. Then I took the eviction notice James had prepared earlier. I taped it right below the sticker. Notice to occupants, Brian Miller and Kimberly Miller. Your tenancy is hereby terminated. I stepped back to admire my work. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic violence. I checked the time. 6 p.m. The Sea Sovereign would be well into international waters by now. The casinos would be opening. The buffet would be serving dinner. And Kimberly would be reaching for that credit card any minute now. I got into my truck. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't regret. It was the feeling of a heavy load being lifted. The weight of expectation, the weight of trying to save people who didn't want to be saved, was gone. I backed out of the driveway. I didn't look at the house in the rearview mirror. I looked at the road ahead. I was homeless, technically, but I had never felt more at home in my own skin. I drove toward the highway. I had a hotel booked for the night. A nice one. 5 stars. And tomorrow I was going to find a balcony with a view of the ocean, order a steak, and watch the satellite tracking of a cruise ship that was carrying a cargo of fools into a hurricane of their own making. The first phase was complete. The trap was set. The house was sold. The money was safe. Now all I had to do was wait for the screams. I sat on the balcony of my hotel suite overlooking the dark expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. On the small table next to my scotch, my laptop was open, displaying a dashboard of financial ruin. Next to it, my phone was connected to the listening device I had sewn into the hem of Kimberly's $3,000 dress. The signal was strong. They were seated in the Lumiere dining room, the ship's most exclusive restaurant. I could hear the clinking of crystal, the murmur of polite conversation, and the soft strains of a string quartet. It was the sound of money. My money, or so they thought. I adjusted the volume on my headphones. Kimberly's voice cut through the ambient noise, loud and brash, amplified by the alcohol I knew she had been consuming since boarding. "This vintage is exquisite," she was saying, likely to her mother. "Thomas gave us this card specifically for tonight. He said, 'Kimberly, treat yourself. He knows he owes us. After all the stress he caused with his moods lately, it is the least he could do.'" "Order another bottle?" Brian Susan's voice chimed in. "The one the sommelier recommended. The Chateau Margaux. If Thomas is paying, we should enjoy it. It is compensation for our emotional labor." Emotional labor. The term made my jaw tighten. "Sure, Mom," Brian said. His voice sounded relaxed, arrogant. He was playing the big man, the provider. "Waiter, another bottle of the Margaux, and bring the caviar service for the table." I watched my banking app. I saw the pending authorizations lining up like dominoes. They had already racked up charges at the duty-free shop. A Tag Heuer watch, designer sunglasses, a spa package for 3. The onboard system approves these charges initially based on the card on file, but it batches them for processing at dinner. And that batch was about to hit the firewall I had built. My phone buzzed. A notification from American Express. "Transaction attempt, Sea Sovereign fine dining. Amount $1,850. Status declined. Reason spending limit exceeded." I smiled. The first domino had fallen. I listened intently. There was a pause in the conversation on the ship. Then a polite foreign voice. The waiter. "Excuse me, madam. There seems to be an issue with the card." Kimberly laughed. A nervous, dismissive titter. "What issue, It is a platinum Amex. There is no limit. Try it again. You probably chipped the chip or something." "Certainly, madam." "One moment." I watched the screen. Transaction attempt, Sea Sovereign fine dining. Status declined. The waiter returned. I could hear the shift in his tone. The deference was evaporating, replaced by the cool professionalism of a man who realizes his tip is in jeopardy. "I am sorry, madam. The card has been refused by the issuer. Do you have another form of payment?" Silence at the table. "Refused." Kimberly's voice rose an octave. "That is impossible. My father-in-law just handed me that card today. He said it was for the trip. Brian, call him. Call him right now." He probably forgot to unlock the travel notification. Stupid old man. Brian's voice came next, sounding annoyed. Give me a second. I will use the business card. The Visa. It has a 50,000 limit. Just put it on that. I watched the second screen on my laptop, the dashboard for the business accounts James Morrison had flagged this morning. Transaction attempt Miller Future Ventures Visa. Status declined. Reason account frozen. Fraud alert. The waiter was back instantly. This time, he wasn't alone. I could hear the heavy footsteps of another man approaching the table. The maitre d' or perhaps security. Sir, the business card was also declined. Code 05. Do not honor. What Brian shouted. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor. That is ridiculous. I am the CEO. That account is liquid. Sir, please lower your voice, the new man said. His voice was deep, authoritative. We have a problem. The onboard system has just updated your folio. The charges you accumulated in the shops and the spa earlier, none of them have cleared. The primary payment method on file has been revoked. Revoked. A beautiful word. I stared at my phone. It began to ring. Brian's face appeared on the screen. I let it ring. I imagined him standing there, sweating in his linen suit, the eyes of the entire dining room boring into him. The other passengers, the wealthy elite they wanted so desperately to impress, were watching the facade crumble. The phone stopped ringing. Then it started again immediately. Kimberly this time. I silenced the ringer. I wasn't going to interrupt the performance. On the audio feed, panic was setting in. My card is at the bottom of my bag in the room, Susan hissed, and it has a daily limit. Bob, do you have your wallet? I didn't bring my wallet to dinner, Susan, Bob snapped. It is an all-inclusive cruise. I thought Thomas paid for everything. He did pay, Kimberly screeched. He must have messed something up. That senile idiot. He probably canceled the wrong card by mistake. Sir, madam, the security officer said. The current outstanding balance on your folio is $7,420. Until this is settled, we cannot serve you any further. And per maritime regulations regarding unpaid debts of this magnitude, we need you to accompany us to the purser's office immediately to arrange payment. If payment cannot be secured, we will have to restrict your access to the cabin. Restrict access. That meant locking them out. You are kicking us out of dinner, Kimberly demanded. Do you know who we are? We are in the royal suite. We know which suite you are in, ma'am, the officer said coldly. But the payment for the suite itself is now showing a chargeback warning from the booking agency. James Morrison was efficient. He must have disputed the original travel charge as unauthorized use of funds. He was nuking the bridge while they were still standing on it. This is a mistake, Brian yelled. I am calling my lawyer. You can make calls from the office, sir. Please. People are trying to eat. I heard the sounds of a struggle, not physical, but the struggle of dignity dying. Chairs moving. Whispers from neighboring tables. Look at them, a woman's voice drifted in from the background. Grifters. I knew that watch was too big for his wrist. The walk of shame. I closed my eyes and pictured it. Kimberly in my dress, the dress with the bug marching past the buffet line flanked by security guards. Brian trailing behind, furiously tapping on his dead phone. Susan and Bob, heads down their free vacation, turning into a hostage situation. The audio feed shifted. They were walking down a corridor. The ambient noise changed to the quiet hum of the ship's administrative deck. A door opened and closed. Sit down, a new voice said. The purser. We need a valid credit card, now, or we disembark you at the next port, which is 3 days away. In the meantime, you will be confined to quarters. I don't have $7,000 liquid, Brian confessed, his voice cracking. My assets are tied up in investments. I leaned forward. This was the moment. The truth was bleeding out. "You said you had $2 million in capital," Susan shouted. "You told us you were rich." "I am," Brian yelled back. "But it is leveraged, and Dad must have done something. He must have pushed a button." "He pushed the eject button, son," I said to the empty hotel room. "So who is paying?" The purser asked, bored. There was a long, heavy silence, the sound of heavy breathing, the sound of a reality check bouncing off the walls. Bob, Susan said softly. "The emergency card. The one for your hip surgery." "Susan, no," Bob groaned. "That is my IRA money. The penalty fees. We have to, Bob. We can't go to cruise jail. We are humiliated enough." I heard the sound of Velcro tearing, a wallet opening, the slow, reluctant slide of a plastic card across a desk. "Visa," the purser narrated. "Debit. Let's see." A pause. A long, agonizing pause. "Approved," the purser said. I heard Bob let out a sound that was half sob, half whimper. $7,000. Gone. Money he needed for his health spent on his daughter's vanity and his son-in-law's lies. "Your access is restored," the purser said. "But I am keeping this card on file. Any further charges will be billed to this card automatically. I suggest you keep your spending to a minimum." They walked out of the office. The silence between them was toxic. "I can't believe this," Kimberly whispered. The venom in her voice was potent enough to kill. "Thomas did this. He did this on purpose. He gave me a dummy card. He set us up." "He is dead to me," Brian muttered. When we get back, I am going to put him in the worst home I can find. I am going to sell the house and leave him on the street." I laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. "When you get back, son, you won't have a house to sell. You won't have a father to bully. You will have nothing but the clothes on your back and a debt to your father-in-law that you can never repay." I watched the banking app again. The alert for the declined charge on my card was still there, a red badge of honor. They were trapped. For the next 10 days, they were prisoners on a floating palace. They couldn't spend money because Bob wouldn't let them. They couldn't have fun because they hated each other. They couldn't escape because they were surrounded by water. And the best part, they had to keep wearing the clothes. Kimberly had to keep wearing the green dress because her luggage was likely still being held until the payment fully cleared the banking system. I was with them. I was the ghost in the machine. I closed the laptop. I took a sip of the scotch. It tasted like victory. But the night wasn't over. Brian would check his email soon. He would check his messages. And there, waiting for him like a digital viper, was the notification from James Morrison. The forced sale. The demand for repayment. The eviction notice. The shock on the ocean was just the appetizer. The main course was waiting in his inbox. I picked up my phone and sent a text to James. Phase 1 complete. They are solvent but bleeding. Bob paid the bill. Proceed with the electronic service of the court documents. Send it now. I wanted Brian to read the lawsuit while he was lying in his bunk staring at the ceiling, wondering how his life had imploded in 12 hours. I leaned back in the chair. The ocean air was cool. I slept better that night than I had in 3 years. The silence in the hotel room wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was the silence of a problem solved. The notification I had been waiting for arrived at 2:14 in the morning ship time. I was sitting on my hotel balcony, the ocean breeze cooling my face, watching the digital dashboard on my laptop. The little green light indicating the listening device was active flickered steadily. They were in the royal suite. I could hear the hum of the ship's engines and the sound of Brian pacing the floor. The carpet in that suite is thick wool, but his footsteps were heavy enough to register. He was anxious. The humiliation at dinner had stripped away his composure. Then the ping. It was the sound of a Priority 1 email hitting Brian's phone. I heard him stop pacing. I heard the rustle of fabric as he reached into his pocket. "What now?" Kimberly groaned from the bed. Her voice was muffled, likely by a pillow. She sounded hungover and angry. Brian didn't answer immediately. There was a silence that stretched for 10 seconds, then 20. It was the silence of a man reading his own obituary. "Oh my God," Brian whispered. The words came out like air escaping a punctured tire. What Kimberly snapped. "Did the bank fix the card?" Brian started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the high-pitched, hysterical giggle of someone whose mind has just snapped under pressure. "Fix the card." "No, Kim. They didn't fix the card. They fixed everything." He began to read aloud. His voice trembled, skipping over legal jargon, hitting the hard numbers like they were physical blows. "Notice of partition action regarding the property at 42 Oakwood Lane. Be advised that the majority owner, Thomas Miller, has liquidated his 51% interest in the property to Apex Commercial Development. Apex intends to file for immediate forced sale of the asset to recover capital. Notice of eviction has been posted. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises upon return." "What does that mean?" Kimberly screeched. I heard the bedsheets rustle as she sat up. "He can't sell our house. It is not our house, Kimberly." Brian yelled. "He owns 51%. We never signed the transfer papers. We were too busy buying curtains and planning parties to sign the damn papers. He sold it. He sold the ground out from under us." "There is more." Brian continued, his voice rising in panic. "Demand for repayment of informal loans. The car. The wedding. The Paris trip. He has reclassified everything as demand notes. He is suing us for $2.5 million, Kim. He froze the business accounts. He contacted the lenders. My line of credit is gone." Kimberly was silent for a moment. Then she asked the question that revealed her true priority. "What about the shop shares, the remaining equity? You said we could sell that to pay Kyle's bookie. You said that was our safety net." Brian was typing furiously on his phone now. I could hear the haptic feedback clicks through the bug. He was trying to log into the brokerage account. "I am checking," he muttered. "I am checking right now. Come on, load, you piece of junk." Then a sound I will never forget. The sound of a phone being thrown across the room and hitting the wall with a sickening crack. "It is gone," Brian screamed. "It is all gone." "What do you mean gone?" "He moved it. He moved the assets. The account balance is zero." "Zero, Kimberly." "There is a note here from the transfer agent. All holdings in Miller Precision Mechanics have been irrevocably transferred to the Martha Miller Charitable Trust." The Martha Miller Charitable Trust. I smiled into the darkness. I had set that up yesterday afternoon. The money wasn't just moved. It was locked in a fortress of philanthropy. It would build schools. It would fund scholarships. It would do 1,000 good things. But it would never, ever pay for a gambling debt or a designer handbag. "That is $3.8 million, Kimberly screamed. "That was our money. That was our inheritance. He can't just give it away to charity. He is mentally incompetent. We have the papers." "We don't have anything," Brian roared back. "Don't you get it? He played us. He isn't senile. He isn't confused. He is 5 steps ahead of us. He knew about the petition. He knew about the home. He knew everything." The room went quiet, but it was a violent silence. The kind of silence that precedes an explosion. "This is your fault," Kimberly hissed. Her voice was low, venomous. "You told me he was a clueless old man. You told me he was an ATM. You said you had handled him." "I did handle him," Brian shouted. "Until you decided to ban him from the trip, until you sent that text message. You had to have your private family vacation. You had to have your vibe. Well, congratulations, Kim. You got your vibe. Are you happy now?" Don't you dare blame this on me, she shrieked. You are the failure. You are the one who couldn't run a business without Daddy's help. You are the one who borrowed $2 million from loan sharks to pretend you were a big shot. I borrowed that money for you, Brian yelled. For your house in the Palisades, for your jewelry, for your brother's debts. I destroyed my life trying to keep you happy, and it is never enough. My brother is going to be killed, Brian. Kimberly was sobbing now, ugly gasping sounds. If we don't pay that $50,000, they are going to kill him, and we have nothing. We are stuck on this boat with no money and no home to go back to. Ask your parents, Brian spat. They are in the next cabin. Ask Bob. He just paid for dinner. Maybe he has a spare 50 grand in his retirement fund. My father is a retired school teacher. He doesn't have that kind of money. You were supposed to be the rich husband. You were supposed to provide. I am broke because of you, Brian screamed. And now my father hates me. He evicted us, Kim. Do you understand? We are homeless. When we get off this ship, we have nowhere to go. The locks will be changed. Our stuff is probably on the curb right now. I took a sip of my water. He was wrong about that. Their stuff wasn't on the curb. Their stuff, the cheap stuff, was still in the house waiting for the developers to bulldoze it. My stuff was safe. The argument on the ship devolved into incoherent screaming. I heard things crashing. Lamps, glasses. They were tearing the room apart just as they had torn apart my life. I hate you, Kimberly screamed. I should have married Jason. At least he had a trust fund that wasn't controlled by a vindictive psychopath. Go ahead, Brian yelled. Swim back and marry him. I am done. I am done with you. I am done with your leech of a brother. I am done with your mother looking at me like I am a disappointment. You are a disappointment. You are a weak, pathetic little boy who let his daddy take away his allowance. I reached out and turned down the volume. I had heard enough. The dominoes had fallen exactly as I calculated. The pressure of the financial collapse had shattered the fragile veneer of their marriage. Without my money to glue them together, they repelled each other. They didn't love one another. They were co-conspirators in a heist that had just failed. And now they were trapped in a luxury cage floating in the middle of the ocean, forced to look at the wreckage of their lives for the next 9 days. I looked at the email on my own screen. It was a copy of the notification James had sent. It was a masterpiece of legal destruction. It was the end of Brian Miller, the spoiled heir, and the beginning of Brian Miller, the defendant. My phone rang. It was Brian. He was calling me. Not Kimberly. Not his lawyer. Me. I stared at the screen. The name Son flashed in white letters against the black background. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to wonder if I was asleep or dead or just ignoring him. Then slowly, deliberately, I swiped the green button. I didn't say hello. I just held the phone to my ear and waited. I listened to his breathing. It was ragged, fast, terrified. Dad, he whispered. His voice was small. It sounded like the voice of the 6-year-old boy who had broken a window playing baseball. But this wasn't a window. This was a life. Dad. Are you there, please? Pick up. I am here, Brian, I said. My voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who has nothing left to lose. Dad, I got an email, he stammered. From James. It says you sold the house. It says you moved the money. Dad, please tell me this is a mistake. Tell me you didn't do this. We are on the ship. We can't fix this from here. There is nothing to fix, Brian, I said. You wanted privacy. You wanted to focus on your family. I am just giving you the space you asked for. Dad, please. He was crying now, openly weeping. We have no money. The cards are declined. They are going to kick us off the ship. And the house? Where are we supposed to live? That sounds like a problem for a man with a $2 million business plan, I said. Or maybe you can ask your wife's family for help. They seem very supportive of your marriage. Dad, stop, I am sorry. Okay, I am sorry about the text. I am sorry we left you. Just please unlock the accounts. Don't sell the house, I will do anything. It is not about the text, Brian, I said, my voice hardening. It is about the brochure in your trash can. It is about the petition to declare me incompetent. It is about the conversation I heard in your office when you called me a clueless old man. The silence on the other end was absolute. He stopped breathing. He knew. He knew that I knew. You heard that, he whispered. I heard everything I said. I heard you planning to sell my company to pay a bookie. I heard you planning to put me in a state facility. I heard you laughing about unplugging the machine. Dad. No, Well, Brian, I cut him off. The machine is unplugged. But unfortunately for you, the cash drawer is locked. Dad, please. The house is gone, Brian. It belongs to Apex Development now. It will likely be a parking lot by Christmas. The money is in a trust. It belongs to people who actually deserve it. And as for me, I am disappearing, just like Kimberly wanted. I am not your ATM anymore. I am just a ghost. Dad, wait. Don't hang up. Dad, I didn't hang up immediately. I let him scream my name one last time. I wanted to remember that sound, not because I enjoyed his pain, but because I needed to remember why I had to do this. I needed to remember that the man screaming on the other end wasn't my son. He was a stranger who had tried to bury me alive. Goodbye, Brian, I said. Good luck with the privacy. I ended the call. I powered down the phone. I closed the laptop. I sat there in the dark listening to the ocean. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but underneath it, a bedrock of peace. It was done. The cord was cut. I stood up and walked to the railing. I looked out at the horizon. Somewhere out there, my son was holding a dead phone, realizing that his life was over. And for the first time in 3 years, mine was just beginning. My phone did not stop ringing after I hung up. It buzzed and vibrated on the glass table like an angry insect. Brian, Kimberly, even Susan. They were calling in a frenzy, passing the phone around, desperate to find a crack in the wall I had built. I watched the screen light up with their names over and over again. It was pathetic. It was the digital equivalent of banging on a locked door in the middle of a storm. I poured myself another finger of scotch. I wasn't drinking to forget. I was drinking to celebrate the return of my self-respect. For 3 years, I had jumped every time that phone rang. I had rushed over to fix leaks, to babysit, to write checks. I had been Pavlov's dog, trained to salivate for scraps of affection. Not anymore. I let it ring for 10 minutes. 15. I wanted the panic to settle in. I wanted them to have time to look at each other in that cramped ship cabin and realize that there was no way out. I wanted them to feel the full weight of the ocean surrounding them. Finally, at 2:45 in the morning ship time, the phone rang again. It was Brian. His persistence was impressive, almost admirable if it wasn't born of sheer terror. I picked up the phone. I didn't say anything. I just breathed into the receiver. Dad, Brian's voice was a wreck. It was hoarse, broken, stripped of all the arrogance he had worn just 12 hours ago. Dad, please, don't hang up again, please, we need to talk. Talk, I said. One word. Simple. Efficient. Dad. What are you doing? Brian wailed. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. I just checked the home security feed. The cameras are offline. The smart locks aren't responding. I tried to call the neighbor and he said there is a truck in the driveway and men putting up signs. Dad, where's our house, our house? He still didn't get it. I took a slow sip of my drink. I looked out at the dark Atlantic water churning below my balcony. It was time to deliver the final verdict. The payoff. Brian listened to me very carefully, I said. My voice was calm, almost conversational. It was the tone of a man explaining the laws of physics. You asked for this. You and Kimberly made a very specific request. What request? Brian sobbed. We just wanted a vacation, no. I corrected him. You wanted privacy. You wanted me out of the picture. You sent me a text message saying you wanted just family. You wanted space to focus on your marriage without the old man hovering around. Dad, that was just... So I continued cutting him off, as Kimberly requested. I have disappeared. I have removed myself completely so you kids could have your private space. I cleaned out my room. I cleaned out the garage. I removed every trace of my existence from that property. But the locks, Brian screamed. The signs. What did you do? I sold my interest, Brian. I sold my 51% stake to Apex Commercial Development. They are a very aggressive firm. They don't want a residential tenant. That house is now the site office for a construction group. They are going to use it as a headquarters while they rezone the block for a strip mall. Silence. The kind of silence that rings in your ears. A strip mall, Brian whispered. Yes, I said. They start demolition on the interior Tuesday morning. Your furniture, the stuff the movers didn't take, will likely be put out on the curb. I suggest you call a friend to pick it up, although I don't think you have many friends left after borrowing money from half the town. Dad. You can't do this, Brian pleaded. We have nowhere to go. When we get back, we will be homeless. We have no money. We have debt. We have a baby on the way. No, wait, we don't even have that. We have nothing. You have your privacy, I reminded him. And you have each other. Isn't that what you wanted? To save your marriage? Well, now you have a real challenge to bond over. Survival. Dad, please, I am begging you, help us. Just this once, I leaned forward in my chair. This was it. The line I had been waiting to deliver since I found that brochure in the trash can. I am helping you, Brian. I am teaching you a lesson about consequences. And as for your living situation, I paused for effect. Good luck finding a new place better than the nursing home you planned for me. I heard a gasp on the other end. It wasn't Brian. It was Kimberly. She was listening. You knew about the golden horizon, she whispered. Her voice was trembling. I found the brochure, Kimberly, I said coldly. I found the emails. I found the petition. Aggressive dementia. That is what you called it. You were going to lock me away in a state facility and feed me slop so you could steal my life's work. No, Thomas, we were exploring options. She lied, desperate and pathetic. I explored my options too, I said. And I chose the option where I keep my money and you lose your house. It seemed like a fair trade. Dad, Brian yelled. We are sorry. We won't do it. We swear. It is too late for swearing, Brian. The papers are signed. The money is moved. The house is gone. You tried to bury me, but you forgot one thing. I am the one holding the shovel. I moved the phone away from my ear. I could hear them both screaming now, a cacophony of regret and panic. They were blaming each other. They were begging God. They were realizing that the ATM was not only broken, but it had just eaten their card. I have one piece of advice for you, I said, bringing the phone back. Enjoy the buffet. Eat as much as you can. Because when you step off that ship in 10 days, the real hunger begins. I didn't wait for a response. I pressed the red button. Then I did the one thing that makes a breakup final. I opened the settings menu. I scrolled down to Brian's contact. Block caller. I did the same for Kimberly, for Susan, for Bob. I set the phone down on the table. It was over. The silence returned to the hotel room, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was light. It was clean. I looked at the laptop screen one last time. The bug was still recording. I could hear them sobbing in the cabin. I could hear Susan yelling at Bob for paying the bill. I could hear the disintegration of a family that never really existed in the first place. I reached out and closed the laptop. I didn't need to listen anymore. I knew how the story ended. I stood up and walked to the railing of the balcony. The ocean was black and vast, stretching out to the horizon. It was terrifying to some, but to me, it looked like freedom. I was 70 years old. I had $4 million in the bank. I had my health. And for the first time in my life, I had no obligations to anyone but myself. I thought about Martha. I thought about how she would have reacted. She would have cried for Brian, certainly. She was a mother. But she was also a woman who believed in justice. She would have stood by me. She would have understood that you cannot save someone who is trying to drown you. I raised my glass of scotch to the moon. To privacy, I said aloud. I drank the scotch. It burned, then settled warm in my chest. I went back inside and lay down on the crisp hotel sheets. Tomorrow I would wake up when I wanted. I would eat a steak for breakfast if I felt like it. I would call a travel agent and book a trip. Not a cruise. Maybe a safari. Maybe a trip to Japan to see the high-speed trains. Something precise. Something efficient. My son was on a ship to nowhere. I was on solid ground. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The kind of sleep you only get when the job is done right. The kind of sleep you earn. Is this the payback they deserved? Hit. Like if you found this satisfying. 10 days later, the Sea Sovereign docked back at the port. I wasn't there to greet them. I was 1,000 miles away, sitting on a balcony in Sarasota, Florida, drinking freshly brewed coffee and watching the sun glint off the Gulf of Mexico. But thanks to James Morrison, who had hired a private videographer to document the eviction process for legal security, I saw exactly what happened when the prodigal family returned to 42 Oakwood Lane. The footage was grainy, taken from a parked car across the street, but it was high definition enough to see the exhaustion etched into their faces. They arrived in a yellow taxi, not a luxury car service. They looked haggard. Kimberly's hair was frizzy, stripped of its usual salon sheen. Brian wore the same linen shirt he had boarded with, now wrinkled and stained. Susan and Bob looked like they had aged 10 years in 10 days. Kyle was nowhere to be seen, likely having abandoned ship the moment they docked to escape the tension. They stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by their expensive luggage, staring at the house. Or rather, what was left of it. The manicured lawn was gone, churned up by heavy machinery. A massive dumpster sat in the driveway, filled with the debris of their renovations. The custom cabinets Kimberly loved were splintered wood sticking out of the top. The imported tile was dust. And right across the front door, the door I had taped the notice to, was a sheet of plywood spray painted with the words, Apex Commercial Development. Demolition Zone. Keep out. I watched Brian walk up the driveway. He moved like a sleepwalker. He tried to punch the code into the garage keypad. Nothing happened. The power had been cut. He went to the front door and tried his key. It didn't fit. I had changed the cylinders myself before I left. He started pounding on the plywood. "Open up," he screamed. His voice was thin, desperate. "This is my house. I live here." A man in a hard hat walked out from the side of the house. It was the site foreman. He held a clipboard and looked at Brian with the indifference of a man who deals with trespassers every day. "You need to clear out," the foreman said. "This is a construction site. Liability hazard." "I live here," Brian yelled, pointing at the boarded-up window. "My stuff is in there." "Your stuff is at the city dump, buddy," the foreman said, checking his clipboard. "We cleared the interior 48 hours ago per the owner's instructions. Anything not claimed by Friday noon was designated as refuse. We gave you notice?" "Notice," Kimberly shrieked, running up the driveway. "We were on a boat. We didn't have phone service. You threw away my clothes, my furniture." The foreman shrugged. "Take it up with the previous owner. Now move your bags before I call the cops." We have a bulldozer coming in at 2 o'clock. Kimberly collapsed onto one of her Louis Vuitton suitcases. She put her head in her hands and started to sob. It wasn't the fake crying she used to manipulate me. This was the real ugly sound of someone realizing they have hit absolute rock bottom. Susan and Bob stood on the sidewalk looking around nervously, terrified that one of their country club friends might drive by and see them destitute on the curb. But the worst was yet to come. As Brian stood there arguing with the foreman, a black sedan pulled up behind their taxi. 2 men in cheap suits got out. They weren't lawyers. They were detectives from the fraud division. I had authorized James to hand over the files on the business loans, the $2 million Brian had borrowed using fraudulent collateral. The forged signatures on the loan applications. It wasn't just a civil matter anymore. It was criminal fraud. Mr. Miller, one of the detectives, asked, flashing a badge. Brian Miller. Brian turned around. He looked at the badge. He looked at the house. He looked at his wife, who was too busy crying over her lost wardrobe to notice her husband was about to be handcuffed. Yes, Brian said. We need you to come with us, the detective said. We have some questions regarding a series of business loans taken out in the name of Miller Future Ventures and some irregularities regarding the collateral signatures of Thomas Miller. I didn't do anything, Brian stammered, backing up against the dumpster. It was a misunderstanding. My father, he will clear this up. Your father is the one who filed the complaint, the detective said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Turn around, please. I watched as they cuffed my son in the driveway of the house I bought him. I watched as they put him in the back of the sedan. I watched Kimberly scream and run after the car, realizing too late that her meal ticket wasn't just broken, he was incarcerated. I closed the video file. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, quiet sense of closure. The machine had been broken. It was dangerous. It had to be decommissioned. I had done my job. I stood up and walked to the edge of the balcony. I walked back inside my apartment. It was a modest place, clean, modern, and uncluttered. On the dining table, there was a stack of brochures, not for nursing homes, for universities. Next to the brochures was a legal document I had signed this morning, the charter for the Martha Miller Scholarship Fund. I had taken the $3.8 million from the shop sale plus the $850,000 from the house, and I had put it all into the fund. It was designed to pay full tuition for engineering students from low-income families. Students who had the talent, but not the means. Students like I used to be. I picked up the first application. A young girl from Detroit. Straight A's. Worked 2 jobs to help her mother. Wanted to design prosthetic limbs. I smiled. This was family. Not by blood, but by spirit. This was the legacy Martha deserved. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, probably the jail or a public defender. I let it go to voicemail. I had blocked Brian, but the system still logged the attempts. He had called 12 times in the last hour. I didn't need to talk to him. There was nothing left to say. He had made his choices. He had chosen greed over loyalty. He had chosen appearance over substance. And now he was paying the bill. I walked into the kitchen and poured another cup of coffee. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Tomorrow I had a meeting with the dean of the local university to present the first check. Afterward, I was going fishing. Real fishing. On a boat I chartered for myself with a captain who didn't care about my net worth, only about whether the fish were biting. I took the photo of Martha out of my pocket and placed it on the counter. We did it, Martha, I whispered. We cleaned up the mess. I thought about Brian sitting in a holding cell, wondering where it all went wrong. He probably still blamed me. He probably told himself I was a cruel tyrant who punished him for no reason. He would never understand that I didn't punish him. I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own actions. I took a sip of coffee. It was rich and dark, just the way I liked it. Life always has a price, Brian, I said to the silent room. You tried to steal it for free, but the invoice always comes due eventually. I walked back out to the balcony. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was mine. I was Thomas Miller. I was alone, but I was free. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to tomorrow. Parental love is unconditional, but financial support should never be. The most painful lesson I learned wasn't in a machine shop, but in my own home by blindly shielding my son from reality. I wasn't helping him. I was crippling his character. A parent's duty isn't to be an eternal ATM, but to raise adults capable of standing on their own 2 feet. Setting boundaries against disrespect is not cruelty. It is the highest form of self-respect. Never let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, mistake your kindness for weakness. Dignity has no expiration date. Do you think I went too far, or was this the exact wake-up call Brian and Kimberly needed? If you believe that respect must be mutual and actions have consequences, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let me know in the comments, justice served or too harsh.